So we see correlations over and over in any kind of data that show that parents who have more limited income or less education interact differently with their kids than their more advantaged peers. We can just use a very simple example, which happens to be the focus of some of my work, that parents in more economically disadvantaged circumstances, let's just say, spend less time reading with their kids, less time talking with their kids, doing fewer of the things that promote their kids' language development.
And do you have a relatively straightforward explanation for that, i.e., they're spending time worried about life fundamentals versus what could be seen as beneficial but not life-threatening things?
Exactly. So let me answer that in two ways. Going back to the first question you said, so, well, is it obvious in some ways if, what is the causal nature of that correlation? The reason why that's important is you might say, well, in that case, I could just transfer income to those parents or maybe boost their education because those are the things that they have less of than these other parents, and that might be the way to close that gap. So that turns out not to be true, and that turns out not to be the right policy solution for this particular parent activity that we're interested in. Because it turns out it takes more than income to be the kind of steady parent who reads to their children every night and talks to their children routinely in a way that we know promotes kids' language development. So what does it take? I think that's the question you asked me. And you're absolutely right. It takes a different understanding of why parents do or do not do the things they do. And when we, in our research lab, the Behavioral Insights and Parenting Lab, are trying to identify what are those things, where we land is that there's what behavioral economists call an intention action gap for many parents. Parents have good aspirations. All parents want the best for their kids, but many don't follow through. And why is that? Well, because life gets in the way.
Yeah, good explanation. Yep. So when we talk about the outcomes, and if you say, and is it low income and lower education, are they the same output? Because you've talked about them together. Are they the same or is it a different?
That's another great question. People often say them in the same breath as I just did, as if they were the same, and they are not.
Okay.
Income, for example, is highly variable month to month, year to year. Many families who are officially poor are only poor for a few number of years. There's very few families who once poor are persistently poor. Education is more of a, once acquired, obviously does not diminish. Yep. And you can be a poor, struggling PhD student, but have a lot of high human capital, as it were, even though your income isn't the same. So it's a very interesting question. Which of them is more relevant for interacting with kids? Mostly we, in fact, look at parents' education.
Okay.
And mostly the distinction we make is between parents who are college educated and those who are not. In most of the research, that seems to be a very important distinction.
When you look at the data and you say, here's the implications, and what we're really talking about is the amount of time and the activities that parents are doing with their kids when they're young. I want to talk for a second, what is important and what implications are there that you see on these kids if they're doing less of these things?
You've asked two of the hardest questions in my research world.
Okay.
We have some evidence, and I would say my own belief is that the parenting behaviors for which we have the most evidence include talking with kids and reading to them.
Okay.
To develop their cognitive skill, by which I mean language skill, but also math, the kind of, you might call them hard skills or quantitative skills. And I would say that there's a pretty good evidence that if you lack literacy and math skills or other things which we rarely measure, like curiosity or problem solving, your success in the labor market is going to be diminished.